All right, so let's get started here with 1.5. This one is just a little bit of information and then a lot of practicing on your part. So we're going to look at quadratic equations here. A quadratic equation, right here, a quadratic equation is an equation that can be written in this form right here that I already had highlighted in green. Ax squared plus bx plus c, where a and b are real numbers and a does not equal 0. So in other words, you can't have a equal to 0 such that there's no x squared term, and you can't have b, well, b can be 0, but it has to be real numbers. So a cannot be 0, because then it just becomes a linear equation and it's not quadratic. And you also can't have any x cubes or anything like that in there. All right, so then the one main way that you can always solve these is with the quadratic formula. All right, there are many other methods for trying to factor these and stuff like that, but I am a very big believer in this quadratic formula. If you ever want, you can ask me and I'll show you a derivation of this, but it essentially comes from using this right here and completing the squares for it. And then you can actually derive out this quadratic formula right here. But basically, what it does is it tells you what x values can solve for this, and you should have at the most 2 of them. Technically, you should always have 2 of them, real or unreal, but sometimes it might be what is called degenerate, where a value repeats itself. So anyway, here we go. We've got x is going to equal, and we're going to put in the negative value of whatever is here on b, plus or minus that b squared again, that same b, whatever number is in front of the x, minus 4 times this a value times this constant value. So a is the number in front of the x squared, the coefficient there, and c is the constant value with no variable with it, all divided by 2 times a. And then don't forget this plus or minus. This is what will give you the 2 potentially different values for this. All right, be careful when doing these. This inside of here, if this turns out to be a negative number, then you're going to have complex solutions for this. So just be careful you're getting the signs right on this, because you don't want to end up with complex solutions when you're not supposed to, like say you made that a plus instead of a minus or something like that. So be careful with that. So let's take a look here. Here it says solve by factoring or by using the quadratic formula. Well, the reason I like the quadratic formula is sometimes you can't factor them, or at least not easily, because you have very strange answers. But other times, it may just not be apparent what to factor or how to factor it, and you may just not realize it. And so you can always fall back on this quadratic formula, this thing right up here, because it'll always work for you. It may not always be the fastest way to do it, but it'll always work for you. So here I'm going to show you doing it both ways. So first, I looked at this and realized that from this 4x squared plus 8x, I realized that both terms there have a 4x in them. So I factored out this 4x. Essentially what I did was I said, okay, we have 4x squared plus 8x equals 0, and I saw they're both divisible by it, so what I'm going to do essentially is multiply by 4x over 4x, like that, which is just the number 1. And so then what I'll do is distribute this underneath, and I have 4x times 4x squared over 4x plus 8x over 4x. This is how you factor stuff out, and then of course times 0 is still 0. And then you'd look here, and this would be 8x over 4x. That gives us this 2 right up here. And then you'd have 4x squared over 4x. Well, the 4's will cancel, and one of the x will cancel, and that gives you that x right there. And so these last 2 steps were kind of the long way of taking this step to get right there. So this right here is the next step after that. So once you get that part done, you should see then, I don't need to leave that there for you, you should see that we have 4x times x plus 2. And if 4x equals 0, then the whole thing is 0. Or if something makes this x plus 2 part equal to 0, the whole thing is 0. So I just need to look and see what values for each will do that. From the 4x, we basically say right here, we'd say something like 4x equals 0. That means that x equals 0. That's for that part. And then for the next part, we would say x plus 2 equals 0, and we'd subtract 2 from both sides and get that negative 2 would make that equal to 0. So that's the way you do it, just by factoring it or splitting it up into stuff times itself like that. So there's the factoring. So 0 and negative 2. Over here, what we're going to do is go through and actually use the quadratic formula. So I have 4x squared plus 8x, and then plus a 0 right here. There's no plus anything right there. That means that when we look at this form, this c value right here is 0. So I went ahead and wrote that in. And then what I can do is write that a equals 4, that's from that right there. B equals 8, that's that coefficient right there. And then c equals 0, that's that one we added in right there. Now that I have all of the values of a, b, and c, I simply plug it into this equation that's right up there. Okay? And so to do that, let me get rid of some of this stuff here so I don't have marks all over. But doing that, b is 8, so I put in negative 8 right there. Then b squared right there. Then minus 4 times a, which is 4, times c, which is 0, which you notice is going to make that whole thing right there go to 0. It's going to cancel out. And then divided by 2 times a, 4 again. All right, and so when I do that, it's just a matter of going through and figuring this out. Again, the 4 times 0 right here, that part is 0. And then you have 8 squared, which is 64. So that brings us to this next line where we bring down the negative 8, we keep the plus or minus, and then we have 8 squared, so we end up with the square root of 64, and then 2 times 4 is just 8 right there. All right, and by doing that, we can go through and just start figuring this out. The square root of 64 is 8, so that's this part right there, and then bring everything else over, and we have negative 8 plus or minus 8 over 8. And so if we use the plus, we have negative 8 plus 8. So if we do the plus, that's 0 over 8. That gives us the 0 result. If we do the minus version, if we do this minus version down here, we have negative 8 minus 8. That's negative 16 divided by 8. And that's the negative 2 right there. So we get our two different values because of that plus or minus. All right. Here on the next one, you can see I worked it out again. I noticed that 2x could be factored out of both terms there. So I did the same thing like I did before that I wrote extra for you up there, where I just factored out a 2x and then divided each term by that 2x. That was the same as multiplying by 2x over 2x and distributing the denominator through like I did in the previous one. That gives me 2x times 3x minus 1 right there. And it turns out that if either one of these, if 2x is 0, then it's 0 times something and the whole thing is 0. Or if 3x minus 1 is 0, then the whole thing is 0. So, let me do this in a different color. And so what I did is I said 3x minus 1 equals 0. And over here I said, when does 2x equal 0? And figured out what each one was. When x equals 0, 2x equals 0. And when x equals 1/3, 3x minus 1 equals 0. So that right there gives me my two answers. Okay, and I'm going to put a little box there. That's that answer, and there's the other answer. Or we could have done the quadratic equation again. So again, 6x squared minus 2x, right? 6x squared minus 2x, and then we have to add this plus 0 in because we don't have a c value. That tells me that a equals 6. That's this 6 right there. B equals negative 2. Don't forget that negative with it because it's a minus 2, so it's negative 2. And then C again equals 0 right there. So now that I have all three values for A, B, and C, I can simply go through and plug it into the quadratic formula and figure out what the result is. And you can go through and try that, and you should end up getting the same values, okay? So give that a try and see what you get. The next one is x squared minus 9. Now in this one we're missing an x term. We're missing that b term. So if we rewrite this, we rewrite it as x squared plus 0x minus 9. And then if you go through and do the quadratic formula, you have a equals 1, because that would be a 1. That would be a 1 out in front right there. And then, so A is 1, B is 0, and C is -9. Again, don't forget that negative right there. And what you end up with is going ahead and trying to plug this in. Well, remember, this is opposite of B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. So immediately B is 0. That's 0, and that is 0. And so you end up with something pretty simple to go through and try and solve. So try plugging it in and seeing what you can do. I also went ahead and did it for you a couple of different ways. First thing I noticed is that anytime you have something squared like that and then minus a constant squared, something else squared, it's the difference of two squares. And what you can do is make it like if it's a squared minus b squared, it becomes a minus b times a plus b. And so in this case, a is x, so we get x minus, and then the square root of 9 is 3, so x minus 3 times x plus 3. Okay, so that's the difference of two squares. If it happens to be like that, don't make the mistake. If it was x squared plus 9 equals 0, that's not going to work. Don't do that with the plus. It only works with the minus. Okay, so be careful of that. And then you can go through and solve. This is x minus 3 times x plus 3 equals 0. So if x minus 3 equals 0, it's 0. If x plus 3 equals 0, it's 0. So what makes x minus 3 equal to 0? 3 does. And what makes x plus 3 equal to 0? -3 does. So we get 3 and -3. And then another way that this could be done, and I did it right here, is just to say x squared minus 9, and that's to distribute the 9 to both sides. So add a 9 to both sides like that, and you get x squared equals 9, and then you end up with x equals, and you take the square root of both sides, right? You take the square root, and when you take the square root, you have to do plus or minus, because if I say x squared equals something like 4, well, then that tells me I'm squaring something. So I could say, well, 2 squared equals 4. That's correct. But also -2 squared equals 4. So when I take that square root, I have to say x equals plus or minus the square root of 4, which is plus or minus 2. Okay? So be very careful with that and make sure that when you do square roots, you're adding in that plus or minus. So we have x equals plus or minus the square root of 9, and so that's a +3 and a -3, and they're the same answers. So there are answers, +3, -3, right there. And if you go through and try doing it here with the quadratic formula, you should also get 3 and -3. So I want you to give that a try and see that it works for you. All right, that's pretty much it. After this is just some practice problems for you to try. I want to encourage you to go through and try them both using the quadratic formula and also using just regular old, whatever method you want. So, for example, you could try going through this one and saying, well, I can make this x squared equals -25. Sorry, 16x squared equals -25, which means x squared equals -25 over 16. And then you're saying, oh, wait, now I have to take a square root. So, think about that one in regards to what we have done. You could also try this one with a 16x squared plus 0x plus 25 equals 0, where this is A, this is B, and this is C, and you can use x equals opposite of B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. So use that quadratic formula and see if you can get it. And see how the answers compare, okay? So, but try doing it different ways and see what happens. Same thing with these other ones. Try doing them in different ways and seeing if you get the same answers with the different methods. It's a good way to check yourself. If you want, you can also then, at the end when you get your answers, plug them back in and see what they get. See if they are the actually same answers. And then if you're having trouble with one of them in particular, you can't get the answer, then I would say either contact me so that I can give you the answer, or help you look at it. Or what you can also do sometimes to help you check yourself is go to wolframalpha.com, and you can actually type this whole equation into it, and it'll solve it for you and tell you, what the answer should be. So you can check your answers that way and see if you were doing okay with it. All right, so do this page, practice these ones. Again, pick out A here would be 1, B would be -10, C would be 24. Do the quadratic, but also try to factor it. Try to look at it and say, can I think of something maybe that multiplies to 10, or I'm sorry, adds to 10 and multiplies to 24? Doing this old way that I'm sure you should be familiar with. And if you can think of something that works that way, then you should be good. The first thing I can think of is 12 and 2, right? And if we go with -12 and a positive 2, that's going to end up giving us a positive 24. So that's not going to quite work. So try going through, try doing some other ones, see if you can come up with something. I know that 12 times 2 is 24, but we're not quite getting that difference. So see if you can come up with some numbers that work there, and if not, if you don't see it, try doing the quadratic, right? Try going through and doing the quadratic on some of these. And then here on this page, do the same thing. I'd recommend when you get ones like this where they're all divisible by something is to divide it out like that. And then you can divide both sides by 2 and just have x squared minus 3x plus 2 equals 0. And that's the same thing, and you can get the same result for it, and you can go through and either factor it out or use the quadratic formula. But the good news is, if you don't realize to do that and you don't take that out, you don't factor it out and you use the quadratic formula on it, it'll still end up giving you the same answer. So on this one, I would recommend trying the quadratic formula with a equal to 2, b equal to -6, and c equal to 4, and then try the quadratic formula on it with a equal to 1, b equal to -3, and c equal to 2. And you'll see that you should get the same answer both ways, a, b, and c, and a, b, and c. So even if you don't factor something out, if you miss that you could have factored something out, you should see here that you get the same answer, okay? So go through, finish these up, and see how you do, and let me know if you have any questions. Okay, that's pretty much it for now. Thanks. Bye.